Hello everyone, welcome to my third instructional video for Math 1. Hopefully you guys have having a great week so far. I'm so grateful for everybody who has been following along and trying their best with the videos and the packets. Shout out to those who joined the live session yesterday on Tuesday, and for those who have turned in their work so far. I just want to encourage you guys to keep up the good work. I know there's a lot going on, but I really appreciate and want to just celebrate the amount of effort you're putting into your schoolwork and the steps that you're taking towards your goals. Okay, so I don't have any other updates other than the fact that there's a live session on Thursday from 9:30 to 11:30. But depending on your block, that's when you show up. I have it on Google Classroom, so make sure to check it out when you want to log in and to say hello and just to ask any questions you might have. And that's about it. If you have any comments or questions or just updates you want to share about your life, I'm always available over message on Google Classroom or on YouTube. So let's begin. Please grab your packets. If you have your computer and you're working online, grab your online version. And if you have our paper version, follow along with me. Let me just share my screen now. Alrighty, so our saga with correlation and scatter plots continue, all right? Today, our objective is gonna be you're able to identify whether a scatter plot shows a weak or strong correlation. So by now, you already know red means you don't have to write it down. Blue means you gotta write it down. So keep that in mind. And let me do a quick review before we begin our lesson. So far we've been learning about the scatter plot. We already know that the x value is our independent variable, our y is our dependent variable, our scatter plot is a graph of data points, and our goal is to be able to describe what these data points mean. We know that between the dependent and independent variable, there is a relationship. The mathematical term for that is correlation. If you forget what correlation means, remember there's relation in the word. And we've learned so far whether correlation is positive, negative, or none. All right. So in this case, if you notice, I'm going to highlight it. If we look at the trend or the general direction of our data points, it's going up from left to right, so meaning that it is positive. Now, if it was going down, it means negative, and if the dots were all over the place, it means there's no correlation, meaning there is no relationship between the independent and dependent variable. Today we're working on weak or strong correlation. Now, you're probably thinking, Miss Sim, how can a scatter plot be weak or strong? This is where I make a bad joke about how scatter plots don't work out. But we're talking about relationships, right? So think about when I talk about a strong relationship, think about the relationship that you have with your closest best friend. You have a great connection, right? There is a lot if you do something that influences your friend, if your friend does something, it influences you. If you had a weak relationship, right? Like think about a relationship with a stranger. What you do really doesn't impact that person, right? And what that person does doesn't really impact you. That's a weak relationship. So I kind of want you to think about that metaphor while we're talking about strong or weak correlation with scatter plots. Now, that's a lot of information from the get-go. Let me just show you what that looks like. And then as we go through some practice problems, that should probably help you understand a little bit more of what I mean when I talk about strong or weak relationship or correlation. So take a moment to look on the first page. Please refer back to this whenever you're doing your practice problems. I know from experience that identifying the strength of a scatter plot is usually best with experience. So if you see enough scatter plots that are strong, enough scatter plots that are weak, you're able to recognize it better. So follow along with me. There's no writing involved here, but let's say I'm looking at a strong, positive scatter plot. If I was to make a highlight that follows the direction of the points, do you notice how all the points are inside the highlighted color line? So when the points are close together, it means that it's strong. Let me do the same thing with one highlighter here. Notice how now not all the points are inside the highlighted shading area. It's a little bit more spread out. It means it's getting weaker, or in this case, it's a moderate positive scatter plot. And if you look at here, we see that it's super spread out, and that makes it a weak positive scatter plot. It means the relationship between whatever is the independent or dependent variable is weak. Same thing in reverse, but negative, right? If it's close together, forming a line, I guess in this way, this direction, it's negative. If it's a little bit spread out, it's moderate. And if it's super spread out, but still you see a pattern, it'll be a weak negative relationship or correlation. So keeping that in mind, let's turn to our page 2. Before we begin, again, I know this is a lot of information. I want to show you examples of things that we might get confused when we're talking about strength, okay? So we already know no correlation, right? It's when all the dots are all over the place. It means there's no relationship. If you look at this point, this might look like an example of a no correlation. But this is actually something called a nonlinear correlation. So there is a relationship. It follows a different pattern. It doesn't make a line. Basically, anything that's nonlinear, as the name says, it's not a line. So if it's curved, if the pattern is curved, it means it's nonlinear. We won't be working with these graphs in this unit, but keep this in mind as we move into more advanced math. Not every scatter plot is linear, meaning it doesn't follow like a linear pattern. The more you like understand different types of data, different types of graphs will show up. But you don't really need to know that fully. So I just wanted, food for thought for you. So I'm switching to my blue pen, so let's get ready to write down. I'm going to give you the definition for strong and weak correlation, and then we're going to go through a problem together. So strong correlation means that the data points are close together and follow a linear pattern. So basically, if this was a line, if all the data points are as close to this line as possible, that shows that it's very strong. If there's a line, however, and the data points are spread apart like this, actually, let me use a different color. Let's use green. If it's spread apart like this, it means it's not as strong, it's weaker. So the definition for a weak correlation means that the data points are more spread apart. All right. Now, when you're trying to describe, a scatter plot, that's not the right pen. When you are trying to describe a scatter plot, I want you to think about these 4 questions, okay? What are your variables? What's the trend? What's the strength? And what's the relationship, okay? If you answer those 4 things, then you have perfectly answered what I'm looking for when you're looking at a scatter plot. Now with trend, remember, it's talking about positive, negative, or no correlation. When I'm talking about strength, I'm talking about, is it weak, moderate, or strong, okay? And relationship is basically describing the scatter plot using the variables that you figured out in number 1. So let's move on to the next page. Let's do this. Okay, so you should have in front of you the graph that says, does studying affect your grade? So someone went around and interviewed 14 people. So each data point is 1 person, and asked them how many minutes they studied and what they got on their test grade, all right? So bear with me, I'm gonna draw the points on this graph. And then if you have the paper version, you can follow along. Obviously, if it's online, you can't do this. So just kind of, we'll make it work, right? So our first data point says 0.65. So this would have been a nice moment if I could do like a time lapse thing, but I don't have that available. So we're just gonna keep doing this. That's 1070, 1565 is right here, 2070. So someone studied 20 minutes and got a 70. Someone studied 30 minutes and got a 75. 30, 85, 45 is 85, 45, 90, 60, 90, 60, 95, 60, 100, 80, 90, 90, 95, and 90, 100. All right, so we got a general graph right here. That's our points, excellent. Now, we're gonna go through what are our independent and dependent variables. We already know independent, dependent. So the independent variable is time study. The dependent variable is grade on exam. Yes. Now, what's the trend? Is it positive, negative, or is it no correlation? So going from left to right, it's going up. So I know it's going to be positive. So I'm going to say the trend is positive or positivo. And oh, I actually wrote positive here. That's an E. And what's the strength? Now, the points, is it relatively close to making a line is what you want to ask yourself. In this case, I'm going to say actually our data points are pretty strong. You can argue that it's moderate, but in this case, the way to prove that is like if you got more data and then actually if it was more spread out, then it'll be more moderate. But for what we have, I would say our graph is, the strength of it is pretty strong. So I would say the strength of the scatter plot is strong. And when I say what's the relationship, this is where we can put everything together, right? So basically this graph is telling me that there's a strong positive relationship between time studying and the grade on the exam. So basically it's saying the more you study, the higher grade you'll get on your exam. So if you were someone who wanted to make an argument, this is the kind of data that could support your argument. And that's the cool thing about math and statistics is that it often helps you, it's like evidence that you can use to support claims. So the relationship of this scatter plot, I would say, shows that the more you study, you'll get a higher grade. All right. So great job, everybody, for writing all these notes down. I'm going to move on to the next page and then go over a practice problem with you guys now. So we're on the practice problem section. You guys notice here that I actually included 2 links. I highly, highly, highly suggest that you actually click on those links and go through the practice problems. This is great if you have a computer and you have access to internet, not online. You can go through these practice problems and you actually can figure out right away whether you got it right or wrong. So it's a really good fluency test where you can kind of test like creating scatter plots and also identifying whether it's positive, negative, or no correlation, all right? So please make sure you do that on your own. I'm gonna go over number 2 with you guys. So the whole point about scatter plots is so that you're able to describe actual data. So for this graph, the data points on the left table are graphed onto the right. It's basically taken from 14 US cities and it's talking about elevation. Elevation means like height, basically, above sea level. And we're looking at number of clear days, okay? So actually pause this video for a moment. I want you to answer this on your own. How would you describe the above scatter plot using these 4 questions as guidelines, okay? So answer these 4 questions when you pause the video, unpause it, and then you can double check whether you got the right answer or not. So take a moment, answer that question. And hopefully you're back. Okay, now we can double check your answer. What you should have said when you're describing the scatter plot is this. All right, so our independent variable is elevation, dependent is number of clear days. I would say that this scatter plot shows a positive, moderate relationship between elevation, in parentheses are independent, elevation, and number of clear days, which is your dependent, number of clear days, which means the higher the city, there will be more clear days. I know this is a lot of writing, but I want you to make sure that you are able to write and explain these kinds of graphs, because one, it's going to be really important in any STEM-related career that you pick, and it's also really important for your MCAS. Being able to explain graphs and read graphs is probably one of the most important skills you can get out of a math class. I'm briefly going to go over how I got positive and moderate. So if I look at the data points, if I follow the general direction, I notice that it's going upwards from left to right. So I know it's positive. I also notice that it's not quite close to making a line. It's kind of spread apart. So I know it's going to be moderate. You could have said weak. Actually, that would be a good case. And that's why I'm saying that being able to recognize certain scatter plots is really important. You can always argue for certain situations, but I said moderate because considering there's only 14 data points, it's like relatively close enough to making a line for it to be considered moderate and not weak. But if you have questions about like how do you know the difference, make sure you comment below and I can talk about it in our live session tomorrow. But yeah, thanks for following along so far. Basically, what's next is you just need to finish the practice problems. You have number 3, where you're identifying or describing the scatter plot, and you want to do your exit ticket, which is the same idea. Make sure that you're going through these 4 questions whenever you're describing, all right? This is going to be your best friend right here. These 4 questions is what you really just need to like remember when you're doing these problems. Now, just to recap what we gotta do. So for your to-do, right? 1, finish your practice problems. 2, do your exit ticket. 3, turn in your work. And 4, let me know how you're doing. I would love to hear from y'all. Tell your primary people to let them know to let me know that you guys are doing well. I do miss you guys. Hopefully you guys are being safe and taking care of yourself during this time. But yes, also doing all your math work or to the best of your abilities. Hopefully this lesson was easy to understand. Yeah, and that one math was impossibly easy. I'll see you guys next time. Have a great Wednesday.